He thought it was just another patrol through the fog, but deep in the forest, Caleb found something that defied every instinct he had ever known. 5 wild lions standing not over a kill, but around a bleeding German shepherd, as if guarding him. No growls, no roars, just silence and trust. What happened next would change the way he saw the wild forever. This isn't just a story about a dog. It's a story about faith, redemption, and a miracle that walked on 4 paws and waited quietly beneath the pines. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The morning fog clung thick to the evergreens, shrouding the wild terrain of Everpine Forest in a veil of soft gray, situated just north of Prescott, Arizona. The forest was part of the sprawling Everwild Conservation Territory, a place where the boundaries between wilderness and civilization blurred into whispers and shadows. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of pine needles and earth. A light drizzle had left the dirt trails slick, the kind of morning where even birds seemed hesitant to sing. Caleb Moore, 38, shifted in the front seat of his green Park Ranger Jeep. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with sun-worn skin, short, dark blonde hair, and a squared jaw often cloaked in 3-day stubble. Years ago, Caleb had been a sergeant in the Army's K-9 unit until a roadside bomb in Afghanistan took 2 of his men and left him with a permanently stiff left shoulder and recurring dreams he rarely spoke of. He had a quiet way about him, the kind of presence that said more with silence than most could with words. Since losing his wife to a car crash 5 winters ago, he'd retreated into this job, this forest, and made peace with solitude. His only companions now were the distant howls of coyotes and the creaking branches above his cabin. Today's patrol was meant to be routine: check the trail cams, scan for poachers' tracks, refill salt licks for elk herds. But something was wrong. At exactly 7:42 a.m., just as the clouds began to thin and weak, morning light slipped through the fog. A deep, guttural roar pierced the silence. Not the cry of a cougar or the bark of a coyote. This was lower, rounder, and powerful enough to still the breeze. Caleb's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Every instinct he'd honed in the military told him this wasn't normal. He turned off the engine, stepping out into the wet undergrowth. Caleb grabbed his emergency medical kit and slung his rifle over his shoulder, not to use, but because he had learned long ago that in the wild, unpredictability was a law, not an exception. With deliberate caution, he began to move northward, following the sound. Every step was slow, calculated. The trail narrowed as he pushed through the thick underbrush. Moist pine needles brushed his face, his boots squished in muddy impressions left by something large. The air was sharp, filled with tension. He reached a low rise overlooking a clearing and froze. There, in a shallow dip between 2 mossy boulders, lay a German shepherd, no collar, no harness, just a mangled paw crushed inside a steel-jawed trap meant for wolves. Blood had soaked the earth around it, seeping into the roots like rust. The dog was about 5 years old, his coat a classic black and tan saddle pattern, but dulled with dirt and dried blood. Muscles still rippled beneath his thick fur despite his weakened state. His ears were pinned, teeth bared, but his amber eyes, they were pleading. Caleb took a breath. Then he saw them. 5 lions. They stood in a loose semicircle around the dog, as still and silent as statues carved from golden stone. Each one had the lean, muscled build of an apex predator, fur glistening in the mist. These weren't escaped zoo animals. They were wild, but they weren't attacking. Their eyes weren't on the dog, they were on him. Their gazes locked on Caleb like arrows not yet loosed. One lioness, smaller than the others, with a faint scar above her left eye, took a single step forward, her paw pressing into the soft mud. Caleb felt his heartbeat in his throat. This was the kind of standoff no training manual prepared you for. One wrong move, one raised voice, and he wouldn't make it back to the jeep. He raised both hands slowly, letting his med kit dangle from his wrist, showing he held no threat. The dog, who he would later call Scout, let out a low, pained whimper. The sound cracked something inside Caleb. This animal wasn't just injured, it had been protected, guarded, by the very creatures who should have ended its life. He didn't speak, there was no point. Words belonged to people. Here, only intention mattered. Step by step, he inched closer to Scout. The lions didn't move, though he could feel their gazes tracing every twitch of muscle, every shift of his breath. The fog coiled around the scene like a ghost watching history unfold, kneeling beside the trap. Caleb could see the jaws had bitten deep, too deep. It would take force to open, and strength the dog didn't have left. He reached into his pack slowly, pulled out a thick cloth, and placed it near the wound. Scout didn't flinch. He just stared at Caleb, silent trust and pain etched into his expression. Caleb positioned himself to brace the trap. He paused. He glanced up again. The lions were still, so was time, and then he pulled. Caleb Moore kept his hands raised, palms open to the air, each motion measured and slow. His breathing was steady despite the hammering of his heart, and he could feel every fiber of his being poised on the edge of something ancient and wild. Before him, the largest of the 5 lions, a male with a thick, dark mane and battle-worn shoulders, let out a low, warning growl, but he did not charge. His amber eyes narrowed, assessing, and then, just as suddenly as the sound came, it faded into the fog. Caleb remained still, not blinking, not daring to shift the balance of fragile trust that hung in the forest air. The ground beneath his boots was soft and damp, and he could hear the distant call of a mourning dove somewhere behind him. Time slowed, just feet away. The German shepherd lay trembling, his paw mangled in a steel trap. His black and tan coat was streaked with blood and mud, but his eyes, those deep, gold-flecked eyes, were sharp and unwavering, despite the pain that pulsed through his body. The dog didn't look at the trap, or at the lions. He looked at Caleb, not with fear, with hope. Caleb took that as a sign. He lowered himself slowly, one knee pressing into the mossy ground, and set his med kit beside him. His every move was under watch. 5 lions, muscles taut, standing in a silent arc behind the dog. They were protectors. But of what? Caleb wasn't sure. The trap was old, rusted, but strong. A relic of poachers or illegal hunters who had no business near these woods. He reached out gently, laying a steadying hand on the dog's shoulder. The shepherd flinched, but didn't resist. Caleb's fingers found the spring-loaded mechanism of the trap, and he began working with cautious precision. His body was tense, but his touch was soft. His voice, barely audible, murmured reassurances he didn't know the dog would understand, but still spoke anyway. Miles away, at the edge of Everpine's South Woods, Tara Mitchell was arguing with herself in the mirror of her modest field office. She was 34, with practical auburn hair usually knotted in a messy bun, and sea-green eyes that always seemed a little more tired than they should be. A slim, athletic build spoke to her years working in hands-on wildlife care, and the faded denim jacket she wore every day still bore the claw marks of a cougar cub she'd once raised. Tara was passionate, stubborn, and driven by a promise she had made long ago to her mentor, Dr. Hal Rowan, who had dreamed of building a wildlife rescue center in this very forest. After his death, she had left Los Angeles behind and moved to Everpine to carry the torch. But the town had not been welcoming. The locals were wary of outsiders and even more wary of anything that might attract predators to their backyards. Her proposals were voted down by the council. Her letters went unanswered. She had been labeled a dreamer, a city woman who didn't understand the forest. But Tara did. She understood pain, abandonment, survival. Maybe that's why she still stayed. Her phone buzzed. She stared at the screen. The caller ID flashed. Caleb Moore. She hadn't expected to hear from the forest ranger again. Their last conversation had been brief and professional. A polite refusal when she'd asked for access to a restricted trail near the northern ridge. She answered. Cautious. Tara, Caleb said without introduction, his voice rough. I've got a situation, a dog, German shepherd, caught in a trap. He's alive, but it's bad. Tara straightened. You want me to come treat him? There's more, he said, and paused. He's surrounded by 5 lions, and they're not attacking, they're guarding him. Tara blinked, unsure if she'd misheard. Lions. Guarding a dog? I'm not joking. I need a second opinion. I think he can make it, but he'll need proper care. Tara was already grabbing her keys and her go-bag from the hook by the door. Send me your location. I'm on my way. As she stepped outside into the thinning fog, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the pine trees that marked the edge of her dream, a center still waiting to be built, still waiting to be believed in. But for now, a dog in the forest needed her. And perhaps something more. The jaws of the rusted trap creaked under pressure as Caleb gritted his teeth and gave one final pull. With a sharp, metallic snap, the device loosened its grip, releasing Scout's paw. The German shepherd yelped in pain, but instead of lunging away or snapping in panic, the dog simply let out a low, almost grateful whine and rested his head on Caleb's knee. His eyes fluttered shut for a moment, relief flooding a body too exhausted to keep resisting. Caleb moved quickly, his training in both the military and wilderness medicine kicking in. He pulled a small flask of antiseptic from his side pouch, doused a strip of gauze, and began cleaning the wound. The bite of the alcohol stung, causing Scout to twitch, but he did not resist. There was a quiet trust in his movements, raw, instinctive, and strange given what he had just endured. Caleb wound the bandage tightly, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Mud clung to the corners of the torn paw pad, and blood had already soaked into the earth. A silent testimony to the suffering Scout had endured alone, yet never truly alone. Caleb was so focused he didn't notice the lioness step forward until her paw crunched softly on a dry pine branch. He looked up. She was the smallest of the pride, slender but poised. Her eyes were amber-flecked with green, and her gait was regal as she approached, her head lowered, not in aggression, but in something that looked eerily close to curiosity. Caleb froze, one hand on the dog, the other clutching the edge of the medkit. Every nerve screamed for him to back away, but he didn't move. Then the impossible happened. The lioness took another slow step forward, with grace and silence. She leaned in, nostrils flaring, and gently lowered her broad head. Her nose touched Caleb's shoulder, just a whisper of a contact, and then lingered there. Caleb's breath caught. His heart thundered, but he did not flinch. She drew back, eyes still locked on his. There was no malice there, no hunger. It was a gesture that defied every instinct in the forest, every rule in every book. Caleb wasn't just tolerated, he was acknowledged, accepted, even. As though the lions had drawn a silent ring around the wounded dog, and now, perhaps, around the man who had chosen to help him. The lioness stepped away, and one by one, the others followed suit, melting into the trees like spirits receding into legend. A rumble of tires crunched over damp forest path in the distance. Tara's old Chevy emerged through the thinning fog. Headlights off. Her window rolled halfway down. She parked and jumped out, slamming the door behind her. Tara moved with the confident, purposeful stride of someone who had seen her share of wounded animals and worse. Her auburn hair was pulled tight beneath a wool cap, and her eyes immediately locked on the blood-streaked form lying beside Caleb. "That him?" Caleb gave a nod, still kneeling beside the dog. "Name's Scout," he said softly. "Not officially, but it feels right." Tara crouched down and ran her hands gently along Scout's side, checking for internal injuries. "You get the trap off. Just now." Tore up his paw pretty bad. Tara pulled a flashlight from her coat pocket and examined the bandaging. "Clean work," she murmured. Then, looking at Caleb, "You did this alone." He hesitated. "Not exactly." She followed his glance toward the tree line, where broken branches and faint paw prints still marked where the lions had stood. Her eyebrows knit. "They were still here." He nodded. "One of them touched me. Not a scratch, just touched." Tara blinked, the weight of the moment sinking in. That's not behavior I've ever seen, especially not with a shepherd in the middle of it. Caleb stood and lifted Scout into his arms. The dog was heavy, but he didn't stir much now. Exhaustion had settled into his bones. "I'm taking him to the cabin," Caleb said. "Safer there, I'll follow," Tara said, opening her truck to grab her larger medical bag. The short drive to Caleb's ranger cabin was quiet. The sky had brightened, a pale blue poking through the mist. Birds were finally beginning to stir in the trees, though the forest still felt strangely hushed, like it, too, was holding its breath. Caleb's cabin was tucked beside a slow-moving creek, surrounded by pine and cedar. A weather-worn porch wrapped around the front, and firewood was stacked neatly beneath the eaves, inside. The air was warm, the smell of cedar smoke lingering in the walls. He laid Scout gently on a thick wool blanket near the hearth. Tara joined him, rolling up her sleeves. "I'll need hot water, iodine, and a second set of clean wraps." Caleb moved quickly. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but there was something steadying about his silence, like the forest itself had lent him its calm. As Tara cleaned the wound more thoroughly, she glanced at Caleb again. "You said she touched you." He nodded. "That's a sign of submission," she said quietly. "Or inclusion. Inclusion in some social predators, like wolves or elephants. Physical contact, especially gentle or symbolic, can mean you're part of the circle, part of the group." Caleb let that sit for a long moment, a wild pride. He muttered, "Inviting a man and a dog into its circle. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen those tracks myself." Scout whimpered softly as Tara stitched the deeper part of the gash. Caleb knelt beside him and rested a hand on his side. The shepherd opened one eye, and for a second, the cabin felt smaller, quieter, like the air had thickened with something sacred. Later, after Tara had finished her work and Scout lay bundled near the fire, breathing steady, Caleb stepped out onto the porch. The forest was beginning to glow with late morning light. Pine needles glistened, and a thin breeze moved through the trees. He heard no growls, saw no golden eyes, but he felt them, somewhere out there. 5 shadows moved through the woods, and for the first time in his life, Caleb didn't feel alone out here, not really. The scent of pine smoke curled lazily through the rafters of Caleb's cabin, mingling with the soft warmth radiating from the fireplace where Scout lay curled on a wool blanket. Nearly a week had passed since the shepherd had been freed from the steel trap, and though his paw was still bandaged, the swelling had gone down, and he was beginning to put weight on it again. He'd even managed to limp around the cabin that morning, tail wagging faintly, eyes bright with quiet gratitude. Tara stood near the sink, rinsing a metal bowl, her sleeves rolled up past her elbows. The late afternoon light filtered in through the small window behind her, casting golden edges on her auburn hair. She had been visiting daily, checking Scout's progress, helping Caleb gather supplies, and slowly allowing the walls around her to soften. There was a quiet rhythm between them now, unspoken but palpable, built not through small talk but shared silences, the kind that exist between people who have known loss. "I did some digging," she said, drying the bowl with a faded checkered cloth. "About the lions." Caleb looked up from the table, where he'd been reading an old wildlife report. "Yeah," Tara nodded. 3 years ago, a private facility just west of Flagstaff was raided. They found 9 lions kept in concrete pens, no sunlight, no real food. It was shut down. But 5 of them were rehomed here, released into Everpine under a federal program. No tracking collars, just a quiet start. Caleb exhaled slowly. "So it's them. Looks like it. No other lion groups are on record this far north. Makes sense they'd stay hidden. Trauma like that doesn't disappear. Not in humans. Not in animals." He closed the report, explains why they were so deliberate. "They remember who hurt them," she said, "and who didn't." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and the shadows lengthened across the porch. Scout raised his head and let out a short, thoughtful growl. More alert than afraid, that night. The cabin felt unusually quiet. The crickets sang low, and the breeze tapped against the windows like a distant whisper. Caleb sat in the armchair near the fire, thumbing the edge of a dog-eared journal. Scout dozed beside him. Tara had left an hour earlier, promising to return the next morning with more bandages and a new salve. Around 1 a.m., a sudden, low whimper snapped Caleb from his half-sleep. He sat upright, listening. Another whine, sharp, urgent. Scout was awake, his body stiff, ears alert, then, without warning, the dog limped to the door, paw still partially wrapped, and began scratching at it. "Easy," Caleb whispered, reaching to steady him. But Scout didn't calm. He gave a low, guttural growl. "Woe on." Caleb hadn't heard since the night they met. Something was wrong. Caleb slipped on his boots and coat, grabbed his flashlight and rifle, not for shooting, but for light, and opened the door. Scout darted out, moving faster than he should have been able to. Caleb followed, flashlight beam cutting through the mist that still hovered between the trees. The forest was alive with tension. The air felt charged. The quiet, too, complete. Scout paused at a ridge, sniffed the wind, then veered left into the brush. Caleb moved quickly to keep up, heart racing. Minutes passed, then he saw it. A clearing. 5 figures. Lions stood at the edge of a glade, their bodies partially veiled by mist and moonlight. Their heads were low, but they weren't hunting. They were watching. Caleb stepped closer, eyes scanning the ground. There, in the center of the clearing, half buried in leaves and moss, was a metal trap. New. Its rust hadn't yet settled. Teeth gleamed faintly beneath the moonlight, and around it. The lions stood, silent, still, alert. They weren't here by accident. They were guarding it, like sentinels. Scout limped forward and sat beside one of the lionesses, his body tense but calm, as if he understood what they were doing. Caleb lowered his flashlight. Behind him, a twig snapped. He spun. A shadow moved between the trees, too fast to identify, but he knew that sound. Someone had been here, still might be. He scanned the tree line, heart beating faster, but the forest swallowed whatever, or whoever it was. He turned back to the trap, then down to the ground. Boot prints, recent, 2 pairs. It hadn't just been some leftover snare from years ago. Someone had returned. Back at the cabin, Tara was wide awake, sitting at her desk with her laptop open. Her office was cluttered but functional. Paperwork from the town council. A worn map of the Everpine region pinned to the wall. Vet equipment neatly arranged on a wooden shelf. She was filling out a proposal for her rescue center again when her phone lit up. A message from Caleb. Found a new trap. Scout led me. Lions were already guarding it. Someone's back in the woods. Tara stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she stood, grabbed her keys, and headed for the door. Dawn came slow to Everpine. Pale light filtered through the tall pines like spilled milk across the forest floor, painting long stripes over the moss-covered ground. The trees stood still, reverent, as if aware something sacred had taken place during the night. Caleb Moore stood at the edge of the trail behind his cabin, boots sinking into wet soil, watching as the wind carried the scent of something new, justice. It had taken 5 days of coordinated work, late-night stakeouts and camera traps, but they'd caught them. 2 men, both in their 40s, known for illegal trapping across 3 states. They had returned to Everpine thinking no one would notice, thinking the forest was theirs to exploit again. But the forest had changed, and so had its guardians. Tara had been instrumental. She'd compiled the evidence, filed the necessary wildlife protection documents, and coordinated with the state game wardens. The arrest had taken place in the middle of the night, near the same trap the lions had guarded. One of the poachers was still nursing a bruised ego and a sprained ankle from falling headfirst into his own snare. The news had traveled fast. For the first time in months, the people of Everpine weren't murmuring doubts about Tara Mitchell. They were calling her office, asking questions, offering support. The town council had quietly approved her long-pending request. A wildlife rescue center at the edge of the forest. No speeches, no red tape, just a signed permit delivered to her hands and a subtle nod from Mayor Leland Rayburn himself. Mayor Rayburn, 62, was a portly man with a walrus mustache and a love for bourbon more than bureaucracy. He was known for his slow way of speaking and slower way of making decisions. But when he saw the video footage Caleb had captured, lions circling a trap, a wounded dog standing beside them, and a man caught in the middle, he'd simply muttered, "Well, I'll be damned," and signed the papers. That morning, Tara arrived at the cabin with 2 mugs of coffee and a file folder tucked beneath her arm. She wore a navy flannel shirt, faded jeans, and had dark circles under her eyes, but her smile was wide. "Want the good news first, or the better news?" she asked, handing Caleb a cup. He raised an eyebrow. "Better news. We're official," she said, flipping open the folder. "Rescue permit, survey approvals. We break ground next month." Caleb allowed himself a rare grin. "And the good news?" She nodded toward the fireplace. Scout, his coat beginning to shine again, was standing fully, on all 4 legs, no limp, no wince. His eyes tracked Tara like a soldier awaiting orders. "He's cleared," she said, "fully healed." Caleb crouched and scratched behind Scout's ears. "You're a tough one." Scout licked his hand and wagged his tail gently. It had been 3 weeks since they met, 3 weeks since blood, steel, and breathless silence had bound them all. Now, the forest felt different, like it had opened a little wider, accepted a few more into its fold. Later that afternoon, the three of them hiked toward the Northern Ridge Trail, just a routine patrol. Caleb had said, but Tara knew better. There was something he was hoping to find, or someone. Scout led the way, sniffing the ground, pausing every so often to glance behind as if checking they were still following. The air was cool, but not cold, the wind carrying the faint smell of pine sap and wet bark. Birds chirped lazily overhead, and the crunch of dry needles beneath their boots echoed like a familiar hymn. Then, as they turned the bend where the trail dipped into a shallow glade, they saw them, the lions, all 5 of them, standing quietly in the clearing, not 20 yards away. Their coats shimmered in the dappled light, their heads turned slowly, not in surprise but in greeting. Caleb froze, one hand resting instinctively on Scout's back. But Scout stepped forward, ears raised, tail still. The lions didn't move. They simply watched. Then, in a moment so quiet it nearly passed like a breeze, the led lion, the massive male with the dark mane and patient eyes, stepped forward and dipped his head. Just once, slow, deliberate, a farewell. Scout remained still, and Caleb let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. The lions turned, one by one, and walked back into the trees. No drama, no sound, just the gentle rustle of underbrush and the fading weight of their presence. Tara reached for Caleb's hand. He didn't pull away. They came to say goodbye. She whispered, "No," Caleb said. "They came to let us know they're still here, watching, back at the cabin." The fire crackled softly. Scout lay curled near the hearth again, not out of pain this time, but comfort. A small wooden sign leaned against the porch railing, freshly carved by Caleb himself. Guardians of Everpine underneath it, the date they first met the lions. Tara was outside, flagging survey points for the center's foundation. Caleb joined her, clipboard in hand. The sun dipped behind the ridge, and golden light flooded the clearing. The forest felt full, alive, protected, and as the breeze stirred through the trees, it carried with it something more than wind, something ancient and unseen, not a roar, not a warning, but a memory. Sometimes miracles don't come in thunder or fire, they come in silence, in the soft steps of lions, in the loyalty of a wounded dog, and in the courage of a man who chooses to trust, in the heart of the forest, where instincts rule and words hold no meaning. We saw something greater, a wild circle where love, protection, and purpose were shared between species, without condition. It was not just nature at work, it was something divine. Perhaps it was God reminding us that even in the most unpredictable corners of the world, grace finds a way, that protection comes in forms we don't expect, that sometimes the ones we are sent to save are the ones who end up saving us. In your own life, look for the quiet miracles, the people who stand beside you in silence, the creatures who love without asking for anything. And remember, every act of kindness, every choice to protect instead of harm, draws us closer to the purpose God whispered into our souls when we were born. If this story moved your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope still walks among us. Sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes hidden in the trees. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and if you believe in quiet miracles and divine protection, write Amen to let the world know you're part of that faith. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us in spreading stories that heal and uplift. May God bless you, your home, and all those you hold dear.